Nick, thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay. So Nick, tell us, I guess, to start, where are you from? Where did you grow up?
I'm from Michigan originally. I grew up right outside Detroit, pretty close to Ann Arbor, where the University of Michigan is, and lived in Michigan until I was about 25 and went to school in Ann Arbor. I majored in English, as Nima said earlier. And that was really, when I was a student at Michigan, that's really how I got my toes into technology, computers, however you want to call it.
Okay, so you studied English, and when you studied English, I guess, what were your thoughts as far as what you potentially wanted to do when you graduated?
I was going to write the Great American Novel,
Okay.
and they don't pay for that until you've already written the Great American Novel, and then they pay you for the movie rights. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I started college as a film and video studies major because I thought not watching movies was fun. And I had no idea how that was ever going to turn into a career or like something that anyone would pay you for. And I'm really this is sort of embarrassing to say, I didn't really think about, well, what job will I get and how will I ever make money doing this? And I envied the people who were like, oh, I've wanted to be a doctor since I was 7 years old. And my dad's a doctor, my brother's a doctor, my uncle's a doctor, and I'm going to be a doctor. And they knew that like from the beginning. And then they got to college, and on day one, they're like, well, I signed up for all the prereqs for my pre-med, major. And I do. And I was just like, they were like, well, what are you going to do? I was like, I have no idea. I started taking classes and hated a bunch of them and really liked a bunch of them and was like, oh gosh, statistics is terrible. I'm never doing that again. Okay. Not going to get a career in statistics. And then got another class in, philosophy, and was like, this is super interesting. I like this. Oh yeah. How am I going to make money doing this? And it sort of, without meaning to, I kind of was like triangulating on, I really liked the classes I took in English. I really liked it allowed me to have a really wide breadth of classes because English is a pretty flexible major. So it wasn't like I was just taking poetry writing, et cetera, et cetera. I could take all kinds of classes. And I thought it was going to be a good basis for a lot of things. Well, if I were going to be a lawyer, I could probably get a degree in English and then go be a lawyer. I was in the process of figuring out what I wanted to do when all of a sudden I was like, oh, I need a job during college, and somehow wormed my way into technology through being in school, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to quickly remind the class, if you want to ask a question, you can raise your hand in Zoom, or you can chat it. Okay. So you started to, I like the triangulating. You started triangulating, and you started to kind of move towards, I don't know about moving towards tech, but you were, I guess, your job kind of started to move towards there. You want to tell everybody how that happened?
Yeah, so I was an English major, and I'm going to date myself here. When I went to school, nobody had a computer in their dorm room or in their apartment. No one had a laptop. If you wanted to write a paper, you went to a computing lab on campus and you wrote your paper there. And there might be 30 computers in that lab. There might be 600 computers in that lab. They were gigantic labs full of computers. I found one that I really liked for the dumbest reason. The computers there had a hookup in the back of them that they plugged the campus cable system into through coax. So you could bring up a little viewer on your screen and watch the campus like cable TV feed. So I could write papers and like watch the football game at the same time, and watch like CNN. So I used to go to this one lab because not many labs had this, and I wrote all my papers in this one lab. And after being there for a while, you got to know the people that worked in the lab that like helped you with your computer, and you had trouble and they would come over and help you. I got to know those people, and one of them came up to me one day and says, "What do you do for work?" And I'm like, "I work at the mall. Like, I have the worst job ever." And they said, "You should work here." And I was like, "Well, I don't know anything about computers." And they're like, "Oh yeah, you know enough. You'll be fine. they introduced me to the people that hired all the students to run these labs. And I went in and interviewed, and the interview was going great. I'm interviewing. It was with a guy and a woman named Stacy and a guy named Tim. And Tim and Stacy are like, "You're great. This is great." And I'm thinking, I'm going to get this job. This is amazing. Then they're like, "Oh yeah, we're going to give you a quick technical test to see what you know technically about computers." And I was like, oh, okay. I don't know that I answered any questions right. It was like 30 questions, and I don't think I got a single thing right. And I was like, okay, this is terrible. I'm not going to get this job. I'm going to work at the mall forever. And at the end of the interview, they're like, we really like you. We think you're great. You do have to know more technically. So we're going to give you some stuff to study, and you're going to come back in 2 weeks and you're going to retake the test with us. So I left, I went home, and I like studied the stuff so I knew it backwards and forwards, up and down. Went back and I interviewed with them again, and they gave me the test again, and I aced the test, and they're like, "You're hired." So I was pretty nervous because I really, really didn't know what I was doing. And I would say about 2/3 of the students who walked up to me in the lab and asked me a question knew more about their problem than I did. But I just figured it out. I just talked to people and kind of, did the best I could, and, got really good at Googling things, and that sort of thing, so I could help them. And then after a while, I got good at it. And I was the one giving the test after a while. Tim and Stacy said after a year or so, when we have new people that come in and interview, you just give them the test. And I had kind of gone from like the very, very bottom to one of the more senior people of this student group. And then when I graduated, one of the guys who I worked for said, "Well, what are you going to do after school?" And I said, I don't really know. I'm gonna apply somewhere and figure something out." And he said, "Well, a friend of mine at the College of Engineering at Michigan is hiring for someone to manage and run a help desk at the College of Engineering, a computer help desk. And this is, where people could walk in and ask questions, or they'd call us, or they'd email us. And it was staffed by students. There were two other guys that co-managed it. So it was the three of us, and I got the job. And then the three of us were the managers of this help desk. And we had maybe about a crew of like 25 who worked for us as students. So all of a sudden I went from literally like an English major working at the mall to like 2 years later, I had a full-time job, making $31,000 a year, which is like all the money in the entire world. I couldn't believe, I didn't know how I was going to spend it all. Like I had so much money at $31,000 a year. I was so stoked. And I had that job like 2 years later.
Can I ask what the job at the mall was?
Yeah, I worked at Structure, which is like, was owned by like Express and like the Limited. Yeah, I worked there.
I know it. Yeah.
It was as great as it sounds.
Okay, so I'm gonna quickly toss it over for a student question. Let's start with Maggie, and then after Maggie, we'll get back to your chronology.
Hi, Nick. So I was just wondering, I saw like your intro and then realized you took a lot of like different positions, like some of them are like product management, project management, and then like you also did Q&A, I think, in the intro. So I was wondering like which one of these jobs you think is like most fulfilling and fun to you?
That's a great question. Thank you for the question, Maggie. I think when I had each of those jobs, I sort of thought they were really great. I started in support, and I think support really taught me about empathy. And I mean empathy as it relates to people using computers and software. Because you really I really felt the pain of a lot of people using computers. And this is, I started doing that job in the 90s. Computers were not easy to use. The websites were not good. They did not help you out. It was really kind of hacking through the jungle with a machete, trying to figure out what was happening and what was going on, because a lot of the software was bad. So I think I learned a lot of empathy for other people and in their use of computers and technology. And I still use those lessons today in my job. And that was really from doing support. I learned how to talk about technical things in a non-technical way. I learned how to explain really difficult concepts in terms of other things that people could understand, which is a real hard thing for some people. Just about everyone I work with has a PhD in computer science, physics, electrical engineering. They're all brilliant, brilliant people, but it's hard for them sometimes to read the room, figure out the level of technical skill of the audience, and then quickly turn that into what level they have to speak at so the other people can understand them. When I got into QA, I learned a lot about software development lifecycle. I learned a lot about working with developers and PMs and designers and UX people and customers and all of those people, because in QA, you have to talk to kind of everyone. I got good at, developers would stay up till 2 a.m. writing some piece of code. I would come in the next day and in the first 10 minutes break it. That's not the easiest conversation to have. It's kind of like telling people that their kids aren't very cute, like, yeah, that code that you spent all night writing, it doesn't work at all. You have to do that with some amount of finesse, lest all the developers hate you. So I think that was a good lesson for me there. In the PM world, program management, project management, product management are three terms. Like if we made the Venn diagrams of these, it would be almost 3 circles on top of each other. Different companies call them different things. You could be a product manager at one company and a project manager at another company and do the exact same job. Microsoft doesn't have product managers. Everyone is a program manager. My boss is a program manager, and so is my boss's boss. Like, how does that make sense? We do 3 totally different jobs. So it's a little confusing. To circle back to your question, I like working in the product side of the business. I like working in the PM world the most. But I think if you would have asked me that while I was in QA, I think I would have said QA. I think at the time that was the thing I liked. But I did 10 years of support, and then I did 10 years of QA. And I felt at the end of those decades, I was like, okay, ready for the next thing. Being a PM is the only thing I could imagine doing for longer than 10 years, that I could imagine being a long-term thing. So I hope that sort of answers your question.
Yep, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Maggie. Okay, very interesting. So Nick, how long did you then, after graduation, work at the help desk?
I managed that help desk for 4 years.
4 years, okay. And after 4 years, what ended up happening?
I met a guy that also worked at the university, also worked for the College of Engineering, not doing what I was doing, but he was a computer guy. He ran a computer camp, actually, at the university. And I met him and we became friends. And he started a startup, a little startup that was working with biotechs and pharmas, doing data mining. And he said, you got to come and work for my startup. There's like 3 of us. You'll be like employee number 4. Come on, it'll be great. I said, well, yeah, but you don't need a help desk manager. Like, what would I do? He's like, oh, I don't know. We'll figure something out. And I was 20, I don't remember, 24 or 23 and like 25, something like that. I was like, sure, of course we'll figure something out. Never really taken the time to think, hold on, wait a sec. And it's funny because I think if I had been asked the question now, I'd be like, yeah, it's too risky. We don't know exactly what I would do. You don't have a job description. There's no interview process. This sounds shady. I'm not doing it. But at that time I was like, what could go wrong? It's going to be great. And I think that like kind of naivete like served me well, actually, because I just jumped in with both feet. It was like, great. And I got there in the first day and everyone around me was writing code. They were like literally sitting at computers writing code. And I was like, well, I can't write code. And they're like, well, you should learn. And I was like, no, I hate writing code. And they're like, oh, well, then what are you going to do? And I was like, well, I'll test the code you're writing. And I became sort of the QA tester guy. And then I realized after a while, now they were calling me the QA guy. And now I had to learn about it. So then I started reading books, reading on the web, and like trying to like reverse engineer my own job, basically. Like now that I've got the job, I better learn how to do it, was basically my philosophy. And I was there for 4 years doing QA at, a little tiny startup in Ann Arbor.
Well, it's interesting. I usually, because this is something that students typically, a lot of them end up asking us throughout the semester when they're kind of deciding whether to go to work for a startup after leaving the Fung Institute or leaving Berkeley? Should they go to a startup? Should they get industry experience first? Is there, a better time to do one of these things to start their own, projects or companies? I was going to ask you what your decision-making process was, but you were very clear there wasn't one.
No, it was sort of made for me. Yeah.
Okay. So I do want to ask, and then I'll throw it for another question. Broadly, what is QA?
So QA is when we talk about it in terms of software, is something very different than when we talk about QA in terms of like anything else in the world. So very briefly, if you're a QA person at Ford and you work on the factory floor, you might be figuring out if like the rear view mirrors they make are within some tolerance of the same size. You're assuring that there's quality in parts often. That's not at all what you do in software QA. So software QA or software testing is developers are going to write a bunch of code. They're usually going to write that code off of some spec that they've been given. They've been given some requirements document. You're going to take that requirements document, you're going to take that code, and you're going to make sure that the code does what the requirements document says. That's the basis of it. That's the bare minimum you need to do. Make sure it does what the kind of documentation says it should do, which has spawned a whole style of coding where you write the tests first, called test-driven design. You may have heard that phrase, where you write all the tests and then you tell the developer, you've got to write code that will pass all these tests. So it's kind of the opposite way chronologically of doing it. The other thing that you do while you're doing that is you just try to break it. So when I would be testing something and it would say like, what year are you born? And it's got drop down menus, or you type in the boxes. I would put, 0000 and hit enter. I would put ABCD and hit enter. I would write a little line of code and put it in there and see if the whole thing blew up. Like I would put in bad data, and we would slowly find a way to make it easier and easier to use. Like the year of birth had to start with a 19 or a 20. That way we didn't get bad data on the back end when people said they were born in like 1600. We didn't allow you to hurt yourself by accidentally typing in your birth date is 1195 when you obviously meant 1995. So it became testing the software to do what it's supposed to, but also sort of usability testing to make the software more friendly to the end user.
So how can I put this correctly? Why would somebody choose to go, like if somebody's trying to think if they want to do QA or, software development or software engineering, what would attract somebody to QA versus, software development? Like what skills are required? What, type of overall, person would want to do that?
So I think the correct buttoned up answer is some people really like to test software and they find that process interesting and blah, 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 blah. A lot of people get into QA because they couldn't get a job being a developer. Frankly, I couldn't get a job doing coding, but someone would hire me for QA. So that was my foot in the door. And I was a QA engineer for 3 years. And then they had an opening for a software engineer and I moved over and was a software engineer. That's super, super common, which is one of the things about QA. A lot of the people don't stay long because they're using it as a stepping stone for another job. I wasn't doing that. I never wanted to be a developer. I wasn't good at it. It wasn't the thing that I loved doing. So it was something that I used to use in my interviews when they were talking about my career. And I was like, I want this QA job and I want to continue working in QA because I wasn't trying to go do something else. I think a lot of the skill sets are fairly similar in terms of personality, an analytical personality, the desire to work with software all day, the desire to work within the software development lifecycle and get to know that process. I just think a lot of people do it as a stepping stone to other things. No problem with that. There's nothing wrong with that. I think the best developers I've worked with are often people who were QA engineers because they see the value of QA engineers. A lot of developers, there's a little bit of an adversarial relationship between QA engineers and software developers, kind of like, you're the guy who's checking my work. Well, I don't need anyone to check my work, or I'll do my testing on my own. I don't need you. There can be that thing. My goal when I worked with developers was to really forge a good relationship with the developers and show them I wasn't there to tell them their code was wrong. I was there to help them build the product. And once they saw me as like a friend, oh, then we got along famously. But that's a people skill. That's not a technical skill.
Great. Okay, I'm gonna throw it over to Magdalena. Oh wow, questions are filling in. Okay.
Hi, Nick. Yes, I would like to ask you, what are the most common challenges that you face when working on machine learning projects?
Oh, that's a great question. The number one problem in machine learning that we face, I work in applied machine learning. And what I mean by that is we're not working on toy problems. We're not working on kind of experimental problems. We're working on real world applied problems for actual companies. One of the projects we just worked on was with Pepsi, working on having less waste in the Cheeto making process so that when they make Cheetos, they make them to very tight specifications of length and curl. And they have sensors that measure the length and curl of Cheetos. And they had too many that were falling out of tolerance. So we were writing machine learning code in reinforcement learning to make sure more of them were within the right tolerances so they had less waste making Cheetos. I'm not making this up. And the biggest difficulty, the biggest problem is getting good data, because I work in reinforcement learning, which is a field underneath machine learning. You may have heard of supervised learning and unsupervised learning. The third one of those is reinforcement learning. And we have to have a simulator. So you have an agent that is going to do something. They're going to take some action, and a simulator, which is going to accept that action and give you a set of states and give you a reward. And it's a way to train something by giving it rewards. And you have to have a simulator that reflects the real world. So building those simulators is complicated. Getting the data to build those simulators is complicated. I worked on a mining project. I flew out to Australia. They took us, 1.5 kilometers underground into the mine where they're mining gold. And it's one of the most unbelievable things I'd ever seen. We were going to have a simulator built so we could train these machines that they use in the mine. And we asked them, do you have data from these machines? Oh, yeah, we got lots of data. Well, when we went and actually studied the data, they have cameras that look at the rocks that are being quarried. The cameras would get mud on them and then would be not working for like a week. They'd get no data because they got mud splashed on the lens of the camera. So we'd have no data. Getting that data, that is the challenge right now that we face in machine learning. Getting data to build simulators is probably the very hardest thing. I would say followed by having people who can do machine learning. It's a very difficult thing. And that's why I was saying earlier, I work with a bunch of PhDs. These people have to know a lot about what they know to be able to program and make machine learning work. And those two things are very, very difficult.
Thank you, Nick.
Of course.
Great question. I'm going to throw it over to Tyler, who has a question about QA.
Hey, Nick, thanks for coming today. I was just wondering, so I've done I worked on a project one time. We were designing an app, and we basically, I was in charge of doing user testing. So, I would have older people come in and, interact with the app, and then, oh, okay, they're struggling with this doesn't make sense. Reiterate. Is that along the lines of QA? Is that something, would user testing be something that perceivably, is related to your job?
Yes, you're totally right. You're totally correct. There's a whole branch of it. It's called user acceptance testing. And that is where you have built something and you take the actual user. That could be internal to the company. Like it could be, we're building this piece of software for engineers to use within the company. Let's get those engineers. Or it could be external, where you're actually like interviewing people and saying, hey, would you come and use our product? And we're going to watch you use it. And we're going to talk to you about it. And you're going to tell us what's great about it and what's terrible about it. User acceptance testing is a whole field. You could probably find books of 800 pages just on user acceptance testing. But yeah, that's definitely a part of software quality assurance, and a very big part. Getting users to test it is even better than getting quality assurance people to test it, because those are the people that are actually going to use it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was
Sure.
a really awesome position.
Great, thank you, Tyler. Okay, so Nick, you are at the startup. You're there for 4 years, and what happened then?
So, as happens with a lot of little tiny startups, the startup started to have money problems. We really had one really big client, a giant multinational pharmaceutical company, and this is 2004, and they turned their focus away from what we were working on, and we kind of ran out of clients. So the startup closed, and I was looking for another job, and had my brother-in-law had started a software company in California and said, oh yeah, I need a quality assurance person. Come on, move out here. So it was another job, 2 jobs in a row that I didn't interview for. Someone called me and said, hey, you should come and work for us. And I moved to California. It was another startup. There were 6 of us or something, and I was the QA person. We didn't have a staff, and I started the QA department there. They didn't have a bug tracking system. They didn't have any of the infrastructure that you need to kind of run QA, which is obviously very important. So then I started doing that, and that's how I got into not only doing more quality assurance, but got into working in the healthcare sector, because we were building a hardware device for use in healthcare.
Okay, for reference, everybody, I'll tell you that Nick's brother-in-law actually was a speaker for us last year. If you want to go on the Fung Institute YouTube page, my interview with him last year is on there. Actually, very, very interesting person. Was an engineering leader at NextGen. So tell us a bit about, working in the healthcare industry, medical devices, what that, I think, experience was like. You were at NextGen for quite a while.
Yeah.
And I guess, I'll ask a couple questions. What was that experience like versus, working in software? And just overall, you were there for, I believe, 10 years. What was your kind of career progression there? What did you work on? You one time came and demonstrated the device for one of my classes, was really interesting. So tell us about the experience there.
So the startup that I was talking about that I worked at in California got sold after a number of years to a large healthcare company that makes electronic medical record systems. You go to the doctor, they take down your name and your height and your weight, and they put it in some system. They built those systems. And this was one of the best things, and maybe the best lessons I learned, was when we sold Satori Labs to NextGen, they already had a QA department. So they didn't really say, oh, we really need your QA guy. They had a team of QA people to test software. What they said is, we need some of the people who know your software to come along with you. And my brother-in-law asked me if I was interested, and I was, but I said, there's not a room for me doing quality assurance. I want to switch over and work on the product side. I want to be a product manager. So what did he say? Oh yeah, sure, sounds great. He didn't say, like, what are your qualifications to do product management? What do you know about product management? Let me see your resume, because he already knew me. Getting your foot in the door at a company and showing them that you'll show up and you'll work hard and you're smart and all these other things is really important. People will give you jobs to do things that your resume doesn't qualify you to do, because you've worked with them doing something else. And that's what happened to me. Is my boss at the time said, yeah, you can work product management, you'll be great at it. I found myself in the same position again. I now have the job. Now I have to go back and figure out how you actually do product management, which means I read a bunch of books, watched a bunch of YouTube videos, and looked around on the web a lot, and made a bunch of mistakes along the way. working in healthcare is interesting. It can be a very fulfilling job because there's often a direct link between what you're working on and really helping really sick people sometimes. And that can be very fulfilling. It's on the downside, it's a very slow moving industry. It's an industry that is not constantly innovating. I'm talking on the software side. We might be innovating on the drug creation side, but if you were to walk into a hospital right now and sit down at their electronic medical record system, it might look like it was built in 1998. And there's a good reason for that. It was built in 1998, and they just keep plugging in things on the side of it and tweaking it. That was frustrating because it felt like we were behind the curve somehow. And I was like hearing about friends at Google who were like, you know, working on flying cars or whatever. And I was working on software from, you know, like the Clinton administration. So that was sort of depressing in a sense. But at the same time, I learned a lot about the industry. I learned a lot about selling into that industry. I learned a lot about how doctors' offices operate. And I could have left there and been a career healthcare person because of a lot of the knowledge that I sort of picked up when doing that job.
So, you know, I think almost every semester I have several students that want to get into product management. I think, you know, it's been happening more and more and more. And it's always one of the tougher things that I think for students to get a position in product management, I think without a lot of experience. Broadly, what is product management and how do you get into that as a career? I know in this case you said you kind of, you know, moved over, but what does product management really mean?
Yeah. So product management is sort of being, in a sense, the CEO of the product. You have to figure out, what do we need to put into this product? In what order are we going to put those things into the product? How are we going to pay for it? How are we going to support it? Who's going to maintain it and how are we going to maintain it? How are we going to update it when we have to update? You're having to figure out all the things from like the gestation period of that product kind of through its whole life cycle. And that means working with development. That means working with QA. That means working with sales and marketing and UI, UX and other product managers and stakeholders and customers. Interestingly, you don't manage any of those people. You can't tell any of those people what to do. They all work for other people. The developers work for some engineering manager. QA works for some QA manager. Sales is working in the sales department. So it's tricky because you need a bunch of things from a bunch of people and you don't own any of the people. So it isn't like I just tell people what to do all day and I tell them to make this feature and don't make that feature. It's difficult because you have to get your product. There's a lot of horse trading. You have to get your product going and working and getting resources without owning those. So product management is all about figuring out how to get more features built into your product for customers so that customers like your product, in a nutshell.
Okay.
It is a hard thing to get into. It's super hard to get into. And here's why I think it's hard to get into. We've all heard of the person who's like 14 years old and is like an amazing programmer already. We've all heard these stories. Or, oh, I've been programming since I was like 15. And then I wrote my own website when I was 15. And then I wrote an app for the iPhone when I was 16. And then I did this one. Nobody comes up to you and says, I've been product managing since I was 14. No one's like, well, I product managed a product when I was a 15-year-old. No one's done that. You can't walk into a company and go on LeetCode and take a test and they're like, you're amazing at programming. You can do that for programming. You can't do that for product management. There isn't as much of a test you can just pass, which obviously shows them how good you are at doing the thing. There is for development. If you're going to write code, they will give you a test. They will look at your code. They'll say your code's beautiful and amazing. Come and write code for us. Being a PM, I've talked to a lot of developers who say, oh, I hate having to interview PMs. And I say, why? And they say, I never know what to ask them. I know what to ask developers because I can ask them, well, write me this thing in code and explain what an if then else loop does. And then in product management, they're just like, so why do you want to work here? And you get a lot of those like soft skill questions. And I think that's one of the reasons it's hard to break into it, because they don't have a good way of measuring what you know and what you don't know. So what do? They hire people who have already been product managers. Oh, he was product manager at Facebook, must know product management. Let's hire him to work at Microsoft. Oh, you worked at Apple as a product manager? Well, we should hire you over here at Google because you sounds like you know what you're doing. And they sort of trade them around a little bit. That's why breaking into product management, I think, is so difficult.
Like, your ability to incisively cut to the heart of an issue is so good. I really mean it. Your ability to explain these things is amazing. Okay, let me throw it to another question. Wow, a lot of questions piling up. Cool. Okay, Christina.
Yeah, so my original question was about kind of your journey from, English major to where you are now in AI at Microsoft, but it sounds like you're already kind of walking through us that journey. So I think I'm going to change my question to, I guess for someone who, like, I also have a non-technical background. So I studied econ and math in undergrad, and I'm trying to do kind of a pivot to a more technical career. So for someone, in this situation, like, how do you either build that work like you have, which is so amazing, to get into the technical industry, or if you don't have that network, what are some ways for us to, get our foot in the door and like advocate for ourselves that we can do this job, even though our resume might not reflect it?
Super, super good question. This is what you have to figure out. If when you figure this out, you're golden. There's a few things that I can recommend. Taking some classes, even though you're not traditionally trained as a computer scientist or whatever, taking some classes in the broad umbrella of computer science could help you. You can take a programming class and learn to program in Python in like a few months. That it's really not very hard. And if you walk in and say, I got this degree in math, or I have a double major in math and econ, or whatever, I also know Python, that really changes the narrative to the person who's hiring you. You might say, but I don't want to be a programmer. You could take a class in data science. Data science is a huge discipline in and of itself. You with a math background would be the perfect person to be a data scientist. Once you get in as a data scientist at a company, and everyone's hiring data scientists right now, Microsoft's got data scientists all over the place, you could switch into lots of things. You're a data scientist, you could switch over and be a PM. You could switch over and be a developer. You could switch into QA. You would have so many doors open to you because you got in as a data scientist. Data science is a lot of math. Data science is like math statistics-ish stuff. So is what you're doing, math and econ. There's a lot of math and statistics, obviously, in those endeavors. I think that you get in the door doing anything you can. If you start off as a, answering the phones at Microsoft, that can lead to being the like junior assistant to the assistant of somebody. And then that leads to being an assistant account manager, which leads to being an account manager, which leads to being a program manager. And 10 years later, you're like, what do? I'm a PM at Microsoft. How did I get here? Well, 15 little small steps. When I was talking earlier about my brother-in-law never looked at me and said, but you don't know how to be a PM. How are you going to learn that? The guy that I worked with in Ann Arbor never said, you can't come to my startup. You don't know how to do QA. It was because they trusted that I was going to figure it out. This is a smart person who comes to work, who we like working with. He'll figure it out. And if you are there doing anything, whether it's data science or something else, your ability to just get stuff done and get along with people and show up for work, that will get you other jobs that they won't hire someone outside the company for. Meaning they won't hire you with your resume if you walked in off the street. They'll go, oh, math and econ? We're not looking for a math econ person. We're looking for somebody who's been a PM. If you've done something within that company, they don't care about your resume nearly as much now because they already know you. And your resume is just like a paper representation of what you can do. you're a better representation of what you can do than your resume. So get into a company and show them all those things. Differentiate yourself. There are lots of PM certs. You can become a professional product manager, certified product manager. There are like 3 or 4 big schools of product management. I've taken some of the classes and gotten some of the certifications. A lot of companies really like to see those. So if you want to have something on paper, you can go and get one of those certifications. So the other angle I want to mention here is no matter what your major is, no matter what your field of study is, if you can find a company that does that, they need computer people at their company. There are no companies that are like, it's funny, we just don't use computers here. Doesn't exist. So if you're in something that isn't exactly computer science, if you can get into that industry, like say you were like, I went to nursing school and I got my nursing degree and I don't like doing nursing. Say that was your story. I really want to do computers. Try to get into a hospital. There's lots of computers at a hospital, and they're more likely to hire a nursing person to do computer work than they are to hire someone who isn't a nursing student, just because you have some knowledge of the ecosystem. So that's another angle. Right now, when we hire data scientists, we look for people that have math skills. That's like the number one thing under data scientist. So while math and econ can sound so far from like computers, it can be exactly what people are looking for some of those jobs.
It's really funny that you brought up data science, because that's actually the career path that I'm imagining for myself, is to get into data science and machine learning. So thank you so much for the advice.
Sure. There are a lot of classes in data science too. I'm starting a class tomorrow in data science that I'm taking. It isn't a programming class. It's about the theory of data science and that sort of things. But there are a lot that you learn with where they teach you using either Python or R. And if you're interested in data science and being a data scientist, you have to know Python or you have to know R, almost like for 90% of the jobs. Python is one of the easiest programming languages to learn, says the guy who doesn't know Python. So I would recommend getting some skills in Python and or R so that you can be another step up. Hey, I know a lot about math. I want to be a data scientist. Hey, I know Python. Hey, I took this data science class. Data science class could be like a month-long class. I'm not talking like a degree. You will be in great shape getting a data science job.
I'm also taking 2 data science classes this semester, so sounds like I'm on the right track.
I think you're really on the right track. The next step, and this is a longer conversation that I'd be happy to have with you offline. The next step is, how do you get into a company doing data science? And as Nima mentioned earlier, what you want to do, how you figure that out, and how you get the job are 2 different things. And some people are really good at one or really good at the other, but not really good at both. So now that you have a sense for what you want to do, then we would start to talk about, well, how do you get into a company being a data scientist, and what kinds of companies hire data scientists? And Nima's got my contact information. I'd be happy to have a little bit longer deep dive into that with you, and we can talk about some strategies and some types of companies, because I have some specific companies in mind actually that are looking for data scientists that you could keep in mind when you're actually job hunting.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you so much, Nick.
Sure. Thanks for the question.
I'm sure I'll receive 25 emails now in the next hour. I one time had a speaker who was a director at Google come into the class, and I outright banned the class from asking for his email, because I knew I would receive, as a large class, I knew I would receive like 100 emails. And I said, for 2 weeks leading up to it, I said, do not ask for his email, because he cannot answer 100, and the class promised. And then he told me later that he got like 50 requests for like copies. So, but in this case, Nick said it, so please go ahead and email me. That's very funny. Okay, so we have a lot of great questions. This is such a good talk. So I'm gonna kind of fast forward a bit. We're gonna boil 10 years down to what you already described at NextGen. So as I said, Nick and I are good friends, and I really truly believe Nick is one of the most insightful people. He's given a lot of advice to students I've had, and we talk about this frequently. And you know, Nick's process for getting his job at Microsoft when he left NextGen, you know, we talked about it beforehand. You know, we had a conversation when you were kind of figuring out what it is that you were looking for, and then I said I think Nick's process for not only finding the position he wanted, but actually preparing for interviews, networking, the entire thing from beginning to end is the most complete and I think overall most effective thing I've ever seen. And I really mean that from anybody that I've seen interview before. So this could be kind of a longer question, but when you left NextGen, where did you start? How did you first decide what you were looking for? What your and if the class recalls, like the kind of broad topic here is setting your goals, right? How did you set your goals? How did you decide what you were looking for? And then once you were there, what steps did you take?
So the first thing I tried to think of is, what was I hoping to get out of my next job? Was I hoping to get like stepping stone to the next job after that? Was I looking for someplace that I would stay for 20 years? What was the big like one sentence goal of the job? And what I really wanted to do is I wanted to get a job in where I was going to learn a new skill that wasn't healthcare technology. Because I didn't want to work in healthcare technology anymore. I had been in it a long time. It had been almost 10 years that I'd been in healthcare technology. And I was sort of ready to have a different set of problems on my hands. And I said, my next job, I gotta learn something new. And I gotta learn something different. And I started to think about what those things might be that I'd be interested in. And I had done a little bit of work with AI and computer vision at NextGen, a very little bit of work, but I got my feet wet and I'd read some books and I had learned a little bit. And I thought, you know, I really like this AI ML thing. I'm going to try to get a job doing AI, and I'm going to be a product manager in AI. And I made a list of the things I wanted out of the job. And I'm talking like pie in the sky, the perfect job. What would it have? I've related this to Nima before. I read a study once about that this guy did about parking, about finding parking spots. And what he did was he interviewed people who claimed that they always got really good parking spots, and he interviewed people who claimed that they didn't ever get good parking spots. And he did a bunch of interviewing with them to try to figure out what it was about the people who got really good parking spots. And he found at the end that people who got really good parking spots started looking for parking right at the door of the place they were going. So if they were going to a restaurant, they didn't say, there's no parking right near the restaurant. You go like 2 blocks away and you start looking over there. No, these people would drive up to the restaurant and look for parking spots, you know, 1 foot away from the restaurant, 10 feet away from the restaurant. And they would slowly kind of go in circles further out from the restaurant until they found a spot. The people who didn't find spots didn't do that. They just started like a few blocks away because no one ever finds one right next to the door. I took that lesson to finding a job. What do I want? Well, I live in Oakland. I want to work in like Oakland or Emeryville or Berkeley. I don't want to really drive to the city. That sounds like a drag. I don't want to work down the peninsula. I'll be in my car all the time. I'm going to get a job around here. And I remember talking to Nima at this time. I was like, hey, Nima, I got this list. He's like, listen to this. I'm going to get a job right around here. And I want to be able to work from home a little bit because like I don't want to have to go to the office all the time. I made a deal with the devil. Now I can't get out of my house, but different story. I want to be able to, you know, kind of work from home. I want to work in AI. And he was like, oh, do you have like AI experience? I was like, no, don't worry about that. We'll figure that out later. But I want to work in AI. And I kind of want to work for like a big company. Like I want to work for like maybe Adobe or like Twitter or Microsoft. I want to work for something big like that. And I had this whole list of things that I was going to find in this job. And I knew like intellectually, might not find all of them.
And in the East Bay, you want to be in the East Bay too.
Yeah, got to be in the East Bay. Right.
Which, again, not a ton of companies in the East Bay.
No. Yeah. But, you know, details, right? We can figure that out later. So what ended up happening is I knew intellectually I might have to cross some things off the list and like not get all of my top 5 or 6 things, but I'm going to start there. I'm going to start with that. And I'm going to go for that first. And then if I decide I can't get that, then I'll start crossing things out and go down the list instead of taking a job in San Mateo on the first day doing something in healthcare because that's the job I got offered. I didn't want to do that. That was the main thing I did. So I started trying to find companies, really. I started looking for big companies in the East Bay. And I knew Adobe had an office in the East Bay, and I did some work trying to get in at Adobe. They had bought a company out in the East Bay, an advertising company, and I used to work in advertising. So I was like, maybe I could get in there. I then heard there was an office of Microsoft in Berkeley. And I had a little bit of trouble figuring out what they did there. So I started just kind of like looking around on LinkedIn, and I found a job posting for a job doing AI program management in Berkeley. So I wanted to figure out who was the hiring manager was. So I started reading newspaper articles and found out that Microsoft had bought a company in Berkeley that was an AI startup, and they were now part of Microsoft. So I just went on LinkedIn and I started messaging people that worked there that were like in product management and like HR, and was like, hey, I want to work for you. Here's this job posting. Like, when's my interview or whatever? And they said, yeah, we're not hiring. That's not our job. And I was like, but it's Microsoft Berkeley, and there's not like a bunch of Microsoft Berkeley offices. This has to be your job? They're like, so this isn't our job. Back to the newspapers, I found another article about another AI company that Microsoft bought in Berkeley. These companies actually worked in the same building, I found out later, right downtown, right on like Shattuck in Berkeley. So I started messaging people on LinkedIn, and one of the guys got back to me, and he told me who the hiring manager was. So I was like, this is golden. I'm just going to message that guy. He's going to think I'm great. We're going to interview. I'm going to get the job. I'll probably start Monday, you know? He never wrote me back. This guy just didn't write me back. And I didn't know him, and I didn't know anyone who knew him. And my couple friends at Microsoft didn't know him. And I was sort of stuck. Like, I didn't have a foot in the door with this position. And this was great, right? This is the job I wanted because it was right in Berkeley and all the rest of it. So one day I was looking at his LinkedIn profile, and I was looking at the companies he used to work for. And I was like, oh, he worked for like a long time at a company that I knew someone at. It's a guy I knew really well that I used to work with. So I called my buddy up and I was like, hey, do you know this person? And he's like, yeah, really, really well. He worked for me at this company. I said, I really want to interview for a job there. He said, well, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to give him your resume? I said, no, because he'll just throw it out because I don't have the resume to get this job. I need to get on the phone with him. I would like 15 minutes on the phone with him. Or I'll drive over there and like buy him a beer. I don't care. I just need 15 minutes to talk to the person. He's like, done. And my friend called me back 2 days later. He's like, you're going to get an email from him. All of a sudden I had an email from him. He said, yeah, let's set up time for a first phone screen. And he a little bit read me the riot act on the phone because he's like, you don't have the resume for the job. And I don't think you'll pass the technical interview. But I'm willing to give you a shot. You're a friend of our friend who I really like and you really like. And he said a bunch of great things about you. And I'm going to have you talk to one of my engineers. So I got on the phone with some engineer who's a guy I work with now, I'm great friends with now. And he interviewed me and did some technical interviewing. I had no real idea what the answers to his questions were. He showed me a graph and he asked me to explain what was going on in the graph and why the graph looked the way it did. And it ended up being a machine learning graph. I didn't know anything about machine learning really. I mean, I'd done a little bit of reading, but I didn't really know that much about machine learning. So I treated it like I was a QA engineer. And I said, well, there's so many assumptions built into your graph. You've got X and Y labeled. Well, I don't know if those are labeled correctly. You've got numbers on your graph, like 10, 20, 30, 40. I don't know that those are numbered correctly. So I'd have to look into that. And I just started breaking down all the assumptions that I felt like the graph was making. This guy loved it. He was like, see, everyone tries to just solve the problem because he's used to interviewing engineers. He's like, I'm not surprised you used to do QA. You're breaking down all the assumptions we've made in the graph. So I passed the technical interview and then I went on site and interviewed with about 5 or 6 people. And it went really well. I met really nice people. It was a lot of behavioral questions. They weren't asking me to write code. They knew I couldn't code. I told them that up front. So it was a lot of behavioral stuff, and I'm comfortable doing behavioral interviews more than I'm comfortable being asked to write like C# or whatever, which I couldn't begin to do. And I got to the last interview and they said, all right, you got to interview with another person. It's the boss's boss's boss, some GM at Microsoft who makes millions of dollars a year. And they told me his name and they said, you're going to interview with him in it was like a week later. So I started researching this guy, and he was the founder of the startup that Microsoft bought. I swear this story is almost over. And I read articles about him. I read articles about his company. I found a podcast that he was on where he was interviewed. I listened to the podcast. So now I got to I felt like I kind of knew the guy. I knew his personality. He was a really laid back, super sweet guy. He wasn't a gruff, kind of mean tech dude. He was a super nice, it was like talking to your neighbor. And then I interviewed with him and it went great. And I ended up getting the job. And I talked to the recruiter at Microsoft and she said, how'd your interview go with the GM? And I said, I think it went really well. I said, yeah, I found a podcast with him on it and I listened to the podcast. So I knew his background and I felt like I knew him a little bit. And she said, it's funny because he told me that he felt like you guys got along really well, really quickly. Something about he felt like he was talking to someone he had known for a while. And I wonder if that's because you listened to this podcast. And I said, I don't know, maybe. And she said, I've had a lot of people interview with that guy. No one's listened to that. No one's listened to any of his podcasts that he's been on or any, read interviews with him. And I think she was basically saying, this is probably a good idea of yours to actually do that. What I mean to say is, if you've got the most unbelievable resume in the world, just start sending it out and Google will call you and Apple will call you and then you can go in there and you can wow them with your degrees and where you went to school and where you've worked, and they'll be super wowed and they'll love you and they'll give you a job. Great. If you don't have all of those things, you have to differentiate yourself as best you can. You have to do whatever you can do to be better than the woman or the man that interviewed right before you or right after you. So I was pulling out all the stops. I wasn't going to be late for the interview. I was going to have researched all the people. I realized when they sent me the interview invite that they had copied a bunch of other people. And I assumed those are the people I was going to interview with. So I went and read all their LinkedIn pages and learned everything about them, so that when I talked to them, I knew them a little bit, knew what their background was. And I knew that if one of them went to Michigan, I knew if one of the women was she had a PhDs in chemical engineering, but she has done a bunch of work with a thing called computer vision, which is a machine learning thing. I knew a little bit about computer vision. So I made sure to bring that up in the interview. You've got to do as much as you can to make yourself an attractive person in those interviews, no matter what those things are ethically and morally, obviously. But read about the people, read about the company. I went down to the building before my interview, 3 days before the interview, to make sure I knew where the building was, because I wasn't going to get lost on the way to this interview. I was going to round all the corners off this to give myself the best chance. If you then go do that interview and you don't get that job, you don't have to sit around and say, well, I didn't really prepare. Or, well, I was 15 minutes late. That's probably why I didn't get it. You don't have to second guess yourself and question yourself about why you didn't get it or what more you could have done. You can just be like, gave it my best shot, didn't get the job. That's okay. And there's something comforting about that, because no isn't always the easiest thing to hear. Is that too long-winded, Nima?
No, not at all. That was very interesting. I knew most of that story. I didn't know that when your friend had said, send me your resume, you had said, no, I want to get on the phone. That's brilliant. Because your resume, you're right, would have probably been a dead end at that point, right? It would have just been forwarded to the hiring manager. He would have looked at it and told your friend, sure, I'll take a look, and that would have been that.
Yeah. And then when I got hired, the manager who became my boss, great guy, he was like, your resume was never getting you this job. He told me that flat out. He's like, no way. I wouldn't have put you. There were 125 applicants for the job, and they cut from 125, they cut to, I think, 55. That was the first cut they made. And he's like, you wouldn't have made the cut to 55 with your resume. And he's totally right. Like, now I'm one of the people that does the interviews. We wouldn't have, that person never would have made it on. So you have to use whatever people you know, tricks you have. You got to use those things. Once you're in the company, it's a little bit different thing, because then you start to network inside the company. It's easier to switch jobs and all the rest of it. But yeah, it's very true. The last thing I wanted to see was my resume.
That person. Okay, James.
Hi, Nick. Yeah, I had two questions. One you've kind of been addressing, so you can choose whatever's more interesting to you. The first one was, do you have any advice on jump-starting a career change, which you've kind of talked about. The other one was more technical. How much do you find processing power to be a factor in your work, and is that changing?
Yeah, I'll take the second one first. Thanks for the question. It's a really good one. Processing power is hugely important in what we do. Reinforcement learning is extremely process intensive. You're running millions and millions of iterations of using a simulator and having an agent act against that simulator. It's extremely process intensive. That's why people that do it use things like Microsoft's amazing Azure platform. And that's why people at Google are using AWS, and you need you need cloud computing, and you need to be able to turn on a zillion processors with tons and tons of RAM and all of that. It's expensive. I mean, the team I work on uses a lot of Azure dollars, and we get charged for them. My little division gets charged by Microsoft for all the Azure compute cost we use. It's extremely expensive. Of course, it's coming down in cost, and there are ways to make it even cheaper still by using unused nodes in different regions and all kinds of craziness. But it's extremely expensive. So yes, processing power is very important for machine learning. It's changing in the sense that we're building computers more cheaply. It's changing in the sense that we're making better algorithms that need less processing power. We're not brute forcing things as much in ML as we used to. Now we're using, surrogate modeling is something you can read about that helps out an agent to learn. We're using optimizers. So instead of trying to figure out the problem with one big machine learning agent, well, we'll use an optimizer to help us with this choice. So now the main brain doesn't have to make that choice. We'll use another optimizer to make this other choice. So we're kind of like dividing and conquering the work. But yeah, I don't run any machine learning on my laptop. It all gets hooked up to the cloud, and I run hundreds of simulators at a time so that I can get things done. It still can take days to run experiments. So there's going to be some point in the future where people look back on today and go, can you believe that people would start their experiment and then go home for the weekend and have to come back, and their experiment on Monday morning wasn't even done yet? They're going to laugh at that because the computing power is going to be so much better that they're going to be able to do these experiments in 20 minutes. But yeah, it takes a long time, and it's slow and it's pain, but it's great. You go to bed at night and you've got $55,000 worth of computers running your little experiment somewhere in some data warehouse somewhere, and that's super cool. As far as changing careers, I'll hit you really quick with a couple thoughts there. Number one, I think that when you're first getting into the job world, let me rephrase, it's the easiest time to change careers, because you're looking for entry-level jobs anyway, or near entry level. Once you've been in your career for 15 years and you've got a mortgage, maybe you have a family, you're more entrenched in the city you live in, just switching careers is difficult. You don't walk up to a person who's a, computer scientist, 15 years experience, and go, hey, you want to be a lawyer? They're not usually yeah, that's a good idea. I'm going to go be a lawyer. That's oh, whoa. I got bills to pay and I got a lot going on. Switching seems difficult. When you are younger and you're first into the industry, if you decide that you want to be a data scientist and you do that for 6 months and you totally hate it, you can go switch and be a QA person pretty easily. And if you hate that, then you could switch and go do something completely unrelated to both of those and be a florist if you want. Like, you have the ability to sort of wind your way around. And I tell people to take advantage of that. I mean, entry level is such like a dirty phrase, like, oh, that means you make no money and you have to do the worst work and you have to like dig ditches all day. It also means you have a lot of freedom to investigate what you want to do. A lot of people say, oh, I started here as the receptionist. I have a good friend who is an account executive at an advertising agency. She started literally as the person that answered the phones. Didn't know anything about anything, doesn't have a college degree, just a high school diploma, but got the job making, $15 an hour answering the phone. And after 2 years of doing that, they're like, well, she's smart and we like her. She could be an assistant account exec. And she got that and walked her way up. So don't be scared to take the job that isn't the job you want in order to get the job you want. Everyone wants to walk in and be like, all right, we're going to give you $500,000 and you're going to be, the head person in this division. Everyone thinks that would be great. Be okay with taking whatever job, whatever company will give you and turning that into what you want to do.
Thank you.
Sure.
Amazing, Nick. Thank you. Okay, we have several questions left. So I will be quiet. Henry.
Hi, Nick. I think you already touched on my question. So my question is, why do you decide to get involved in AI and machine learning?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it a little bit, and I'll give you a couple other thoughts. The amount of AI companies just in the Bay Area, let alone the country, let alone the world, is insane. I read a stat the other day, and it was something ridiculous. Like in 2017, there are 2,000 AI startups in the US. Today, there are 9,000. It was something crazy like that you were like, well, who's going to work at all these places? I really felt like having AI experience was going to be something that I could get jobs in going forward. I didn't think it was going away. Even companies that have nothing to do with AI are doing AI now. So I just worked on a project at Delta Airlines. They're using AI to do baggage handling at Atlanta's Hartsfield Airport. And they're hiring data scientists and AI people left and right. And that was one of the big things. As I said earlier, I was looking for the next career move. I was looking for the next discipline. And I wanted a discipline that I felt was sort of kind of cutting edge, was sort of kind of new. And that was the main thing that led me to QA. Pardon me, to AI. Too many acronyms.
Cool, thank you.
Sure. Thanks for the question.
Okay, thank you, Henry. Shang Zhu.
Hi, my question is more related to the industrial automation itself. So you mentioned a project with Pepsi. Considering all the projects that you've seen, what do you see like most of the problems are about? So I phrased my question as, where do you see the industrial automation is developing toward?
Yeah, great question. Really interesting. So I'll tell you a little bit about what we do in the applied space. It's a lot of oil and gas, a lot of energy, a lot of supply chain, a lot of machine optimization. Like, we're building widgets and we can build 1,000 an hour, but we want to be able to build 1,100 an hour. Or we're building widgets and we have 20% waste of plastics. We want to cut the waste to 10%. We don't do very much with like autonomous vehicles. There's so many people doing autonomous vehicle right now that we do very little with autonomous vehicles. We do a lot with robotics as well. Like, I have a robot that works on a factory floor and does a thing, and we want to use AI to help these robots learn how to do things. So there's a pretty wide breadth. Mining, that's another one I work in quite a bit, is mining. We do a lot with that. And then, like, at Pepsi, we're doing, foods. We've also done things with making athletic shoes. We've done all kinds of projects. So they're extremely varied in what's out there and what needs to be done. And I think that's just going to, frankly, increase. As far as my vision for the next like 10 to 20 years, so if you look back at like 1980s and the starting of the 90s, having a computer, being a computer user was a difficult thing. I mean, if you went and bought a computer in 1985 and brought it home, you got a command prompt in DOS. And it was like, there wasn't a lot of help. There was like, go figure out how to work DOS. Now my mom has a computer and like a cell phone and an iPad, and she's able to use them. So what we did was we took it from something where you had to have a really specialized skills and knowledge to have a home computer to something where everyone just about in the United States has a home computer in their house and can use it. And people's, 80-year-old grandparents are using their computer in a real way. I think AI ML is going to take a similar path. Right now, you have to you want to do something in AI for your company? Great. Hire some data scientists, go get a bunch of PhDs and go get a bunch of programmers, and they'll all figure it out for you. I think the direction that we want to take it in is where we have the subject matter experts are able to drive a little bit more, and you don't need as much on the data science and development side. So there's more visual authoring, and there's more tools, platforms that help you do what you need to do. Having said that, I don't think it's going away that they're going to need programmers and data scientists and people like that. And the reason for that is, as soon as we make a platform that's really easy for any data scientist to use to solve a problem, people want to solve harder problems. And the platform doesn't do harder problems. It only does these problems. So now they need developers. Once we make a platform that you can use those as an SME, now they want to do harder problems. And it's just going to continue like that. So I don't think that we're going to find that we can just do AI with the click of a button anytime soon. But I do think that's the trend in the industry is how could we do AI without having to without having to go to school for a decade or have a decade of experience in AI ML.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's very interesting.
Sure. Thank you.
Loved it. Let's please say thank you one more time to Nick.
Thanks for having me. I really, as you know, Nima, we've talked about this. I really enjoyed it. So, and feel free to give people my Gmail address. Have them email me at my Gmail address, and I'm happy to answer questions if I can help at all.
Will do. Okay, Nick, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure.
And I guess we will end there.
Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate it. Thanks for your attention. Thanks for the questions.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.